The future of the regenerative movement includes big ag chemical companies and intensive conventional farmers.
What the f?
In this episode, we saw that for real progress and change to happen, it's important not to demonize anyone and to make sure that everybody is involved in the transition. So hi everyone, and welcome back to a fresh new episode of What the Field, a podcast by Crowd Farming, where we talk about all things farming, regeneration, and so much more. Today we're really excited. We're joined by Dimitri Tsitos, who is the founder of AgroSystemic and an alumni of Exeter University, we've just come to find out. So thank you so much for being here, Dimitri. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and what got you into this wonderful and crazy world of regeneration?
Nice, thanks a lot. Really happy to be here, and I'm very impressed how you pronounced my family name, which you did very well. So that's really cool.
I'm glad. I was a bit nervous.
Yeah. So yes, basically, I'm maybe I go through my story quickly of how I got here. I started getting into farming 8 years ago. Started through the lens of agroforestry. Because that was what was really passionate at the beginning. I was really concerned about deforestation and trees, and I was trying to understand how we could bring trees into the agricultural landscape, having understood how agriculture was one of the key drivers of deforestation. So I went through the lens of agroforestry, worked with people like Ernst Gotch, did trainings with people like Mark Shepard, really focused on, let's say, the more alternative side of agroforestry, the more ecologically focused side of agroforestry. That led us to create a farm called Mazzi Farm with my family, with my father and mother and sister as well. So everybody was on board at the start. And we've really focused there on applying some of the techniques and practices we had learned with people like Ernst, Mark, etc. So we bought a small piece of land of 5 hectares in Greece, and we started creating a farm. And that was my first, let's say, proper hardcore farming experience, which taught me a lot. We did a lot of mistakes. And that was a very big and important school for me. After a few years there, I realized that I was really needing to go a bit deeper. And in Greece, I was struggling to gain more experience, more knowledge. I needed to get some inspiration from outside the farm, and so I decided to leave the farm and let my dad manage the farm at that time. And I went to work on different farms. Had a child as well during the process. Got married, and then I realized that my role was not necessarily working on the farm farming. It was much more basically trying to understand how we were going to transition the tree crop system towards, a regenerative system. So obviously very focused on tree crops, and in the Mediterranean, which was where it was more specialized. So looking at olives, almonds, pistachios, a lot of these crops we were growing on the farm in Greece. And I started little by little focusing more and more on the intensive side of tree crops, looking at intensive agricultural systems, super intensive olives, for example, and trying to understand how we were going to shift these intensive systems towards regenerative, if it was even possible. And so I created a company as I started to have a few clients, working with the supply chain. Started working with Earthworm Foundation on a project with the Bell Group, which was in this case dairy, and especially looking at corn, which was diversifying a bit, but it was really, really cool. Worked as well with Propagate, and with Propagate we were looking at economic modeling of regenerative transitions with about 10 different tree crops in the Mediterranean. So needing to talk with a lot of farmers, lots of visits, lots of, basically mapping out the whole agronomic system and understanding where could we transition towards regenerative. What were the low-hanging fruit? Where was it going to be really challenging, and how much all of this was going to cost? Because you said at the beginning at Exeter I studied economics, and for me I always had this very strong economic focus. So great that we know we can do it ecologically, but how are we going to make it? How are we going to transition to regenerative agriculture in a way that's scalable and that doesn't compromise farmers' income? So we've evolved a lot since then. So we started. We understood basically as we were going around, or I understood as I was going around all these farmers and had lots of experiences actually working on different farms before that. I quickly understood that there was a real lack of knowledge in the tree crop space as to how we're going to do regenag, as compared to, for example, the pastured animal space, where there's a lot more experience and there's a lot more information out there. The tree crop space was really lagging behind. And so that's what led me to create a project called the AgroInnova project, which I put together a group of farmers. We went to find the funders, foundations, went to find academics, and went to find some of the best agronomists in Europe, put them together and created a big consortium. And on these 3 farms, we started to implement, take some of their systems, so their intensive tree crop systems, with almonds and olives, and creating a regenerative transition solution. So that's what we're really active with at the moment. It's one of our key projects amongst others. But this is, I think, the most interesting project because it's really an R&D hub that we've created in southern and central Portugal. And we're really taking the risk away from farmers in this project, because it's not necessarily the responsibility of the farmer to be taking on the risk of developing new solutions. All farmers innovate, and some farmers more than others, they like it and it motivates them, and that's great. But to make the radical changes at the speed that we need right now takes a bit of research and development. So we're taking the risk off the farmers, doing it ourselves, measuring everything with our scientific partners as well. So we're looking at a variety of soil health parameters, biodiversity, crop parameters as well, crop production, crop development, growth. We're going to also monitor all the economics. So we've got 40, 50 different parameters that we're following, or more, and so then we're going to be able to go to farmers, and we already are able to go to farmers and tell them this is what works, this is what doesn't, this is how much it costs. This is the essential practice. This is the one that is a bit less priority, let's say. So yeah, that's what we're focusing on at the moment.
Brilliant. And just a quick question: what does that look like for the farmer? Is this like an app or a platform, or is it an in-person service? From the farmer side, what does this look like?
So this AgroInnova project, we're basically working with the farmers. So working with 3 different farmers. So they're our partners in the project. And this is, just we go there, we talk to the farmers, we visit the farmers, we help them design agronomic strategies, and we're really supporting the farmer quite closely. But then, what we're doing with that afterwards, working with other farmers, it's consulting services basically. So we're trying to think how we can improve these consulting services in order for them to be, for us to be more efficient in the way that we access the farmers and offer basically a better price for the farmer, something that's more affordable. So that's definitely part of it. But otherwise, yeah, it's a lot of basically consulting, also workshops, things like this.
Yeah.
And Dimitri, you said you had three farms that you were taking the risk out of them because you're doing this project with them. I guess that you're kind of financing the transition, and if they lose the yields, like you're covering that, or how does this work? And what are the conditions of these 3 farms? Are they the same crops, or what size are they? What are the conditions?
Yeah, so in this specific case, we're de-risking it for the farmers. But again, it's not just about these 3 farmers. This is an open source project. It's really about developing something that then other farmers can come and inspire themselves from, and we can share this knowledge that we're developing there with the farmers to others, and we'll have by then de-risked it to a certain extent, because we'll have already gone through this first experience of developing these systems, these solutions in southern Portugal, which has never happened before at the scale and with the crops that we're working with. So what crops we're working with? 2 of the farmers are almonds, 1 organic, 1 conventional, and the other farmer is olives. So these are one of the farmers, for example. One of our partners is a corporate farmer. They have 2,000 hectares of almonds. Another one is a family farmer. They have 700 hectares of mixed species, and they're just starting to it's a new organic almond plot that we're developing with them, starting from the beginning with an organic intensive approach, let's say. And then the other one has got a super intensive olive grove, again a family farmer, about 40 hectares of orchards, and he's got 215 total, but he does other crops as well. And again, we're developing within that orchard. We take a certain plot of a 3 to 5 hectare plot, and we start working on that, before we scale it out. So we're working on a smaller scale. It's kind of like a trial approach.
Super interesting. And then when you figure out kind of this list of things that you would recommend new farmers to invest in because you've already tested them and they work, what are the main benefits why farmers should invest in this? So what's your focus? Is it resilience? Is it increasing yields? Is it improving the soil? Why should a farmer take on this cost to do the measures that you're recommending?
I think it's important to mention something here, which is, you said take on the cost. If a regenerative transition is well done, the cost to the farmer is minimal. There may be small investments that are happening at the beginning, but the benefits should quickly outweigh the costs. And that's if the farmer is well guided, has good advice, and it also depends where the farmer is starting. It depends on a variety of factors. I'll give you examples. We're working with this olive farmer. This olive farmer is massively over fertilizing. So we come in, and actually when you think about regeneration and regenerative agriculture, many times, we call it regenerative, but it's actually just good agronomy, just good practices. And many times actually farmers aren't necessarily implementing best practices, industry best practices. So it's not even coming in with innovative approaches. Many times the basics are not necessarily carried out. And so there's a variety of reasons for that, but it's what it is. And so when you come in and you tell the farmer, or you come in and you start to do tissue analyses, soil analyses, you start to observe the physiological behavior of the tree, how much growth we're having this year, what do the leaves look like. Then we start to go a bit more crazy and we start to do sap analysis and start to see trends in the sap. And then we're starting to see, okay, so this farmer is over fertilizing, so we can reduce already in year 1 fertilization by 25%. We're going to see what's the result going to be like in September, but we're very confident that it's an over-fertilization situation, and therefore we can reduce the fertilizer just in the first year by 25%. That's a pretty significant saving just off the bat, and that doesn't require a lot of investment by the farmer. It's just not buying so much fertilizer, not applying so much fertilizer. So this is a situation where the efficiency gains free up some capital to be able to invest in a cover crop, for example, that then really minimizes the effect of a regenerative transition on the economics, right? So we hardly have here we don't really have an increase in costs, but there'll be other situations where farmers are very optimized in terms of efficiency, and what happens is that they may need, for example, to invest in the cover crop strategy, which has a certain cost. And these cover crops, they produce some benefits from year 1, but they produce most benefits after 3, 4, 5 years. So there is a certain, what we call a J curve, where there is a certain increase in cost in the short term, but then in the medium term, we start to, or medium like term, by that I mean 3, 5 years, we start to gain quite a lot of benefits in terms of soil structure, in terms of soil organic matter, soil microbiological activity, and then we start to have some of the benefits that we hear a lot of, which is improvements in resilience, reduction in erosion, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I just have, a very quick question about the farmer that you were mentioning earlier. How does a farmer get into a situation of over-fertilizing by that much? Just because how does a farmer get into a situation where he thinks that there's a need for that much fertilizer?
In this case, and in most cases that I've seen where there's over-fertilization, the farmer is following advice from agronomists. These agronomists are usually a part of a cooperative, or are a part of, for example, they are a part of a company and they are commercial agronomists. And there's a tendency for these agronomists to not necessarily to have an incentive to sell more. That's one aspect, and that's definitely happening. And this is where it's important to have also independent agronomists. And it all, at the end of the day, it all comes down to knowledge. and the farmer with the right knowledge would be making different decisions. So we're helping the farmer to either develop the knowledge on farm or to come with new knowledge, right? But that's one element. The other element is, or the other way that this happens, is that there's been a tendency in the agricultural system to just give more to the plant to get more out of it. And so we're in this logic of, maximize your output by maximizing your input. It's pretty simple. Put a lot more fertilizer and you get a lot more yield. Of course, it's not that simple, but that's the thinking process. It can be pretty simple, and that to a certain extent that's true. And so there is this culture of just giving, and trusting that it all works out. But that's very much based on the fact that we have a lot of chemicals that are able to control the negative effects of over-fertilizing. I'll give you an example. In these olive trees, we're seeing a huge pressure of an insect called Cochenilla. It's called in English it is I forgot it right now. The mealybug, and this is an insect that occurs when there is an excess of nitrogen inside the plant, and so it thrives on the plant when there is excess nitrogen, because the plant has a lot of basically of protein, or in this case it would be of nitrogen and amino acids inside its sap, and they come and they start sucking away at the sap, and then they can absorb that protein, which is part of which helps them to thrive. So this is a situation where we're excessively fertilizing, therefore creating weak soil conditions, weak microbiological activity, we're creating weak plants to a certain extent, and therefore then we have to come in with lots of or we can come in with lots of chemicals like pesticides or like fungicides and insecticides to control the issues. So we have the tools to be able to maintain a high input, high output system, but we're seeing in many instances that these tools are not working very well anymore. There's an increasing pressure to stop using so many pesticides, right? There's increasing regulations. There's fewer and fewer products and active substances that farmers can use on the market. So there's a lot of pressure to start and have a bit more of a modest system, something that is, and I'm talking from an intensive perspective, to have something which is a bit more thought out and a bit more reasoned, so that we can reduce the amount of inputs that we're giving to the plant, have healthier plants. So this is what's one of the motivations that's emerging here, and there's obviously quite a lot of room for improvements. Now, it's not, we have to be careful here, because a lot of people think, we are only using fungicides because we're over fertilizing. This is a simplified, I'm giving an example here. This is of specifically the mealybug, but this is a simplified, way too simple way of seeing this. In Portugal, we have crazy rainfall, and we're planting almond trees, which are very sensitive. Regardless of how optimized our fertilization will be, it's likely that we're going to need to use fungicides because of just genetic reasons of the plant, because of climatic reasons. So it's kind of part of it. We'd have to change a lot more variables in the production system in order to have, for example, a pesticide-free crop, especially the production objective.
Talking about fungicides, what's your view of organic in all of that? Where does this fit? We've talked about conventional, we've talked about regenerative, we've talked about the journey from one to the other, and where does organic fit in all of this for you?
I mean, the farm in Greece that we run with the family is organic. I think that one thing is my opinion, and then one thing is our client's opinion. At the end of the day, I love organic. I think it's fantastic. I eat organic at home as much as possible. I think that I would love to go towards a fully organic agricultural system, and I think most farmers would love to take away to not have to spray herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides and insecticides. I don't know any farmer that likes to use these products. Nobody likes it. They've all had health issues because of it. Because at one point they weren't protected well enough. They were breathing something. They ended up vomiting or coughing or not feeling good. It happened to me last weekend. I was in a field and we were planting corn, and there was quite a lot of chemicals involved, and my face was starting to be itchy and to not be comfortable, and I knew it was because of the chemicals. So it's, nobody likes it really. But what I do is I help farmers transition towards regenerative. One of the principles of regenerative is to minimize the use of inputs, to have a healthy use of inputs. But I'm not the person that's going to judge if a farmer is using a fungicide, because actually I'm the last person that's going to judge, because I know the importance of that fungicide to make sure the farmer meets his or her bottom line, and is able to be financially sustainable. So what we're trying to do is to find ways to go towards organic. Okay, we may never get there, who knows, but we are working really hard to reduce, to take out herbicides with a variety of practices. We're also working really hard to improve plant health, to see if we can pull out insecticides as much as possible. So we're tending towards organic always, but whether it is really gets there or not, my objective is to improve it and to go somewhere. Also, whether a client is very intensive or not, I know a lot of people that have a bit of an issue with hyper-intensive systems, and that's fine. They are an issue in themselves, but I'm in a position where I'm not the person that's going to judge that. I'm the person that will help the intensive system go towards something more modest, something more reasoned, something that pollutes less, and hopefully can one day become regenerative. And I haven't kind of killed the intensive system in terms of, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement, and I've known, and we're working with people that are managing super intensive olive orchards in an organic way without being certified, but they're nearly fully organic and they hardly use any fertilizer. And so then you'd be like, what's intensive? Suddenly they started with an intensive approach because they were planting many trees per hectare and they're harvesting mechanically and etc. But their production system's pretty much organic. So I think that we have to be careful not to compartmentalize everything too much in, this is super intensive, this is that. We have to be much more farmer focused, context focused, and understand that there is a path towards a healthy agricultural system. And there's been so many examples that have demonstrated we can go there, and that's what we're working on. So we're here to accompany farmers. The more intensive, the merrier, from my perspective, because I think that the more intensive, the more pollution and the more impact I can have by helping that farmer and helping that piece of land go towards a more reasoned intensive system, a healthy intensive system.
Yeah.
And Dimitri, in that sense, what are the main barriers that that you and other farmers are encountering towards organic? Because there are many examples of organic, of many crops across Europe, that it's the field that we know better. But maybe it is that in some cases it's extremely difficult. What are the main barriers that you're seeing in this journey?
So you're asking very good questions, and I appreciate that. And also the answers are very complex and very specific to crop type, for example, or to region type. So again, having said that, I'll focus on some specific examples and my understanding of these examples, because this issue here is not just agronomic. It's also about the market.
We love that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's exactly. So it involves, I think, quite a broad and complete understanding of an industry to be able to fully answer that question. Okay, so disclaimer. What I'm going to say.
Go there. Let's dive in that one.
Yeah. But let's look at from an agronomic perspective with almonds, for example, in Portugal. Almonds are very sensitive to fungal diseases, and Portugal is very humid. It's not like the dryland orchards that we see in Murcia, where they're all organic, and the pistachio orchards as well of Castilla-La Mancha. They're all organic, most of them, because it's relatively easy for them to be organic. They have less disease pressure there. They have other challenges, water challenges, but their challenges are not around pest and disease management, compared to Portugal, where the issue is pest and disease management. Here is not so much the water one. So here clearly the climate and the fact that we are choosing specific varieties or a specific crop and then varieties of that crop and planting it in this region we're testing an organic orchard with almonds in Portugal. But we've already seen from this year the fungal issues that others, that the conventional neighbors are not having. So we know it's going to be a problem, and it may affect, at the end of the day, it may affect the yields and a variety of parameters. Is it still going to be worth it economically? Let's see what we can do with it. And at the end of the day, it's a question of economics, because it doesn't mean you have more pest pressure that's it kills your crop. You can manage it. You always have some. You have more damage. You have more losses. But at the end of the day, you're still going to get some crop out of it, unless it's a really bad situation. And then okay, So in this case, we've got the climate and the varieties and all these things that play a lot. I'll bring in, because we're talking quite a lot about intensive agriculture, and it's something that I focus a lot on. We have to understand that the more we push a tree to yield, like in almonds, we've got we've got 2 ton kernel per hectare, 2.5 ton, nearly 3 tons at times. So a mature producing orchard is estimated to be producing 2.5 tons of kernel per hectare. This is a lot of yield, and the trees are given a lot of nitrogen and fertilizer to grow fast, to quickly fill up the land with a canopy. This canopy is linked to yield, so the more canopy, the more yield. The faster the canopy, the faster the yield. So all this intensity, which comes from an economic, and these are the systems that are economically viable, unfortunately, or more so as compared to the dryland system, which are not as economically viable, without having a lot of work in commercializing and value adding and stuff. So intensive agriculture is often the profitable agriculture somehow. It's just, in our current way of organizing and current markets. Yeah. And so what's happening is that these systems are really pushing the trees, and the trees get weak. And it's explained this physiologically. We know that when a tree has rapid growth, they have very large cells, more elongated cells. They have thinner cell walls, so they have less resistance to fungal diseases and fungal attacks. So it's really also, we're pushing them so hard that we're kind of also creating the problem for ourselves. So that's another element to that.
So it's also about like long term and resilience, right? You have to focus on creating something healthier, be it the plant and also the soil, I guess, to be sure that this is going to be there for the long term and not just for this year's yield, right?
Exactly, and there is a certain growth expectation that creates issues. And growth expectation is basically economic expectation. So it's also, land is extremely expensive. You have to buy the land. You have to, make implementing an orchard is extremely expensive. Managing an orchard, the fixed costs are also very expensive. So it's, that there's a certain economic pressure on farmers to yield intensely. And recently, that's what's worked best. Recently, I mean, in the recent past, intensive agriculture has yielded a higher profit, but it's caused many other issues. And issues that we know of and that are arising more and more. Issues are linked to resilience, issues linked to a dependence on international markets, and just suffering a lot when there's input price variability, etc. So the system is being questioned, but not that much, right? We see it a lot in our regen ag and alternative ag space. We think that everything's moving very fast, but when you're in the countryside, things are not moving super fast.
It's also what they're taught. I mean, it's crazy to think that in agronomic schools and universities, they're still being taught. I mean, young agronomists and young farmers are still being taught the conventional ways and the intensive ways. So it's also kind of difficult to move against something that you've learned in an educational space that has authority, and then that experts, and I'm doing this because obviously they're paid by certain companies and stuff, are also telling you to do certain things. There's something quite rebellious about regenerative farming, something quite rebellious about alternative farming as well. And that makes a strong community, I would think so, right? In Europe, I think we definitely see a bit of a strong community between farmers and alternative ways of gaining knowledge, like you were saying, and of building educational spaces that are no longer linked to these high authority establishments and institutions.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true in my experience. So that resonates with me. But I'll say something. Which is maybe not the most popular thought or popular idea, but that's also what makes regenerative agriculture space less tangible by the conventional farmers. Yeah, so that's also what's separating us to a certain extent, or separating the regen ag space from the mainstream farming. So that's changing a bit. We're seeing a lot more of the mainstream agricultural space talking about regenerative farming, especially coming from the supply side, because they've got a lot of pressure due to reporting obligations. They have pressure in Scope 3, reporting Scope 3 emissions. They have to start incorporating the ecological externalities, negative externalities from their suppliers. All right, and so that means that the supply chain players and the food industry players, like the big brands, are starting to work with people like Earthworm, for example, to help their farmers transition to regen ag. So we're seeing that happen on the mainstream side. But there's another unpopular thought that I'll share, which is there's not everything about the conventional ag which is problematic and which is wrong. There's a lot of incredible knowledge that's been developed and incredible expertise that's been developed in the past years, and so it's a system that we can consider on many levels to be broken and to be redundant, but it's also a system that we need to. I'll say what I'm trying to say in an example. I've seen so many alternative farmers that have tried to redefine and redo everything, and that they just weren't economically viable. Because they weren't incorporating some of the lessons that we've been learning and some of the things we've been developing in conventional ag space for the past 40, 50 years of how to work at scale, for example, how to be efficient in our operations. These are things that there's a lot we can take from the conventional ag space, and we need to give it we need to bring in a new approach, right? Or at least give it a new direction. And there's some things we're going to need to let go of, and we're going to need to change.
But doesn't being economically viable for a farmer also not come from the farmer? I mean, this is something for farmers to be able to be economically viable, economically independent and everything. This also needs to come from other industry players, from other sides of society, understanding the value of our food, understanding pricing, what is fair pricing, what is the true cost of food, and all this type of stuff. So it's not only the farmer's responsibility to understand how to be economically viable, I guess, by moving closer to conventional systems, right?
Emilia, that's spot on. I completely agree. I fully agree. And now when I'm saying this, it's really within the system we currently have, which the food system is not changing very fast. So the farmers don't. It's very hard for them to start to look at alternatives and etc. Things are growing, like your initiatives at Ground Farming I'm super happy to hear that things are going well and are continue to grow, and it's fantastic to have these alternatives, and we need to have these alternatives that can hopefully redefine how farmers relate to their customers, their clients, and the people that are eating. This is super necessary because, of course, the farmers are constrained by pricing. It would be if farmers were, if you just give 10% increase in price to an intensive farmer, and then tell a farmer do regen ag and don't give him any money, he's gonna be complaining a lot. But if you tell him do regen ag and give him a 10% increase, higher price, he's gonna be extremely happy with that, and he's gonna get engaged because it's gonna cost him 5% to do regen ag well, and I'm not just talking about putting a cover crop and improving soil health. I'm talking about bringing in hedges, invigorate or regenerating his riparian buffers, taking some trees out of production that are on land that is too steep, where there's too much erosion. So starting to have a bit of a landscape approach to regeneration, not just looking at soil health, which is a pillar, which is the starting point. But we also need to understand that if we really want to do regen ag, there's so much work we need to do. If we really want to be in balance with nature and find the right compromise there, we have so much that we need to do, especially when we're starting with these intensive systems, these massive monocultures on thousands of hectares. There's a lot of that needs to be done in order to and that has a certain cost. Planting hedges has a certain cost. Managing riparian area has a cost. Taking trees out of production has an opportunity cost. Yeah. A bit of a tangent there, sorry.
No, not at all.
It's perfect. And I was going to, on this kind of the role that supply chain has been playing, and I think it goes kind of along those lines. They're paying some incentives based on applying certain practices, the big corporates of the supply chain. That's one side, and we're seeing Regen Ag a lot in the reporting, in their ads, in everything, and we're seeing it in our bubble. I guess, like sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, organic, we're seeing the term a lot. But then what we see is that this term amongst at least the farmers that we talk to, and especially with consumers, it's something vastly unknown. Like no one knows what it is in the consumer side, and in the farmer side, especially us that we deal with organic farmers, it's a pretty new concept, and many times it's not easy to explain the benefits comparing to what they already do. So, is this something you see with the farmers that you're working with, or how do they approach to you for advice or for consultancy? And then, what do you think are the main messages that we should kind of convey to these two audiences? So, because they're two such important parts of the puzzle, and they're not there yet.
Yeah. As so to make sure I understand what you're saying, one thing is talking to farmers and one thing is talking to consumers. Like we both need, so it's two different approaches, right? As well, two different communication styles, two different communication channels. I'm much more familiar with the farmers one, less so with the consumers. I would not know how to talk differently to consumers, apart from saying what I tell my friends when I talk to them about regen ag, you know.
That's also interesting. Those
I've got my
conversations are the
arguments,
most difficult ones.
But yeah, for the farmers, I think that there's a real need to continue having, farmers, they really believe what they see. Otherwise, it's just chat. Everybody came to them and told them everything already. You talk to farmers and you say, hey, we're going to do a trial and stuff. You'd be like, and they'll tell you, how how many trials I've done with commercial guys, how many this, how many that, they're very, they're very experienced people. And at the end of the day, the whole of the agriculture industry is organized around them. I mean, when you're on a farm, the number of cars of commercials from all the different brands you can imagine that are coming to the farmer, and trying to have a chat with them, and having things to sell to them, wanting to sell new things to them, or wanting to get a new client. Like, it's constant. Everybody wants the attention of the farmers. And so they've seen a lot. And so what they want is to see things that work in practice. For me, it's really important to be developing demonstration sites. And there's not one demonstration site per region. It's in Alentejo, which is a huge region in southern Portugal. We've already got a few really interesting demonstration farms. We need more. We need 10, 20 of them for each. We need some for the chickens, some for the pigs, some for the cows, some for the dairies, some for the olives, some for the almonds, some for the traditional olives, some for the intensive super intensive olives. We need each system to be represented somehow. That would be the ideal situation, right? But that's also what we're doing here. We're doing something that works in practice on real farms with real farmers, so that then others can come and they can see. So I think that there's a huge value in working on a local scale with your local community as well. Often we have a tendency to think very macro and to look at, what can we do that can affect the most amount of people possible. I think that on this front, when we're talking about how do we onboard farmers and get them interested, it's much more about the small networks, and on the farming community, people talk so much. Like, it's just, people are at the bars or at the, in the villages, and they're talking, and everybody knows everything about everything going on, basically. It's kind of impressive. And so this information spreads fast. So what we need is to set up these systems with these farmers that then they'll start talking, people start getting interested. So, we need to work on a local scale, and we need to not say much, but show. Like, say less and do. And then when you do, you'd be like, yeah, so yeah, we managed, first year we reduced by fertilizer use by 25%. And then we didn't have any more problem with mealybug. Actually, it's just the next year we, mealybug was nearly not an issue. That means a lot for a farmer, and when he can see that, it means even more. So yeah, I think simple messages and going step by step,
Yeah. So what does this mean for the future then? Just the future of regenerative ag is a global success? Is that what you see for the future? Or, I mean, would we be able to transform all agricultural systems to regenerative systems?
Yes, again, that really needs such a big, we need to challenge and change the food system, right? We need support from the brands, the buyers, the consumers. Everybody needs to be on board, from the local, so governments, from the national governments, from the European political agricultural policy, okay, from the brands, the fertilizer brands, the chemical brands. They have their tools are necessary. They're part of it. We can't just exclude them from the conversation. It doesn't make any sense, because they are currently ensuring that we have food on our plates, unfortunately. So we need to be engaging with them and talking with them. We need all these stakeholders to be working somehow coherently as well. So If that happens, then well, that's what we need to have a radical change in our food system. Until then, we'll be tweaking things. And I don't know if we'll be able to tweak things enough and fast enough for us to kind of get out of the situations that we're in right now around water pollution, around small water cycle destruction, and drying out, around biodiversity loss. So let's see. But again, we need to understand, like, what are our objectives with Regen Ag? I mentioned it earlier on. Is Regen Ag about just improving soil health and reducing erosion and gradually reducing fertilizer use, or is Regen Ag about a transformation of biodiversity, water, atmospheric also quality? Is we need to define kind of clearly where we're trying to go with Regen Ag and what we need to do, and understand that it may take many years to get there, but it's not going to be something we achieve in the short term. But this complex, or this more, let's say, this more, I don't want to say radical, but this more complete approach to a regenerative agriculture is going to take quite a lot of work, and the farmer can't do it on his own, as you said earlier on.
And then, Dimitri, my last question, and then I'll let Emilia finish off with our two typical questions. What is the role of measuring outcomes in all of this? Because as you've been specifying all along the conversation, this is super context specific. It depends a lot on the farmer, on the situation. This is about going somewhere. But what is this somewhere, and should we measure it to know that we are going there, or yeah?
Yeah, definitely. So there's different approaches to the measuring, right? So the supply chain, food industry players, they needing MRV systems to be able to understand changes in, for example, carbon sequestration of or carbon emission of their supply chain. A farmer may need a few agronomic parameters: nitrogen use efficiency, how much nitrogen per yield, how much kilos of nitrogen per yield, or water use efficiency, maybe looking at some simpler parameters like soil organic matter with simple soil tests. So it really depends on, but of course, and I mean, this is quite the basic thing, is if we're going to be creating change, we need to be able to measure it, to know where we're heading and what's going on, and to be able to, the challenge is making it efficient for the farmer and for the supply chain. It's about making it efficient. That's why we've got all these new tools, and we've got remote monitoring systems that are being used more and more, because we can do things really at scale. They're not very precise, but we can do things at scale. But for a farmer, it's I think, from the farmer's perspective, there's some simpler metrics that the farmer wants to follow. Agronomic metrics,
Okay.
Yeah, we have these tools. It's simple.
So efficient, so it's scalable. Then also having information that is useful for the farmer, so that they come along, and I would say holistic too, because if you only look into the metrics that you want, they might be going better, but you might be damaging others. That it's what has been happening for so long, right? If the main metric was yield, things were going great, but maybe we were damaging others that we're going to see the consequences in the long term. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's like biodiversity. Biodiversity is difficult to measure. But the interesting thing with biodiversity is that when you put habitat, and when you increase diversity of your plants, for example, it's going to lead to an increase in diversity of insects. So there's different ways to go about it, but definitely I agree. It needs to be holistic and look at, but water quality is another one. It's very common in France to measure water quality, to measure the level of nitrogen at depth in your soil, and to base your fertilization on that. Farmers here don't really do that. They don't know how much, if their nitrogen is leaching through the profile. But with a simple soil test, you manage to get that answer. So it's quite a simple tool. It's just not very common. It's not used yet, and some countries it is. Yeah.
If there's one thing that I feel I've definitely taken out of this conversation, in not like concrete information, but there's this strong feeling that there's no demonization of any of the sides when you speak. So there's this really big understanding of the context from the companies that are selling the fertilizers, from the farmers. It becomes quite easy to demonize high intensity industrial farmers, and it becomes quite easy to demonize big agrochemical companies that are clearly to a certain extent part of the problem. And something that I really enjoyed from this conversation, which we haven't necessarily had with other like conversations about regeneration and stuff, was a nice understanding without any demonization of any of these parties. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's quite nice to have a bit of a change.
I appreciate that, and I work quite hard or in the sense, many of my clients and partners in projects are conventional intensive farmers, and as I talk to them, and they're incredible humans. They're extremely nice people. They're doing fantastic work. We just need to understand, like the whole many industries, on not just the farming industry, that there's time for change now. It's time for evolution, and they need to be helped, and they want to. In many instances, they want to. Few are the ones that say, I don't care about this ecological impact thing. Many are the ones saying, but I feel there's so much pressure on me, but I don't know what to do, and it's becoming really hard for me to be profitable. So is that really my priority right now? And that's a totally understandable position. So this demonizing thing is just counterproductive. I'd rather be working with them and understanding their issues to then be able to, offer something that can really actually help them. And in that way also help all the other, the ecological impact that we're looking for. So
definitely. How inspiring. Great, thank you. And we usually like to end the podcast with two more lighthearted questions, because we tend to get into quite serious topics as the conversation moves along. So we like to finish off with one question, which is what is like a book or a movie or something that you've seen or read recently that has just really opened your eyes and that you would recommend to us and also to our listeners who are not at all, experts in like agroecological systems and stuff like that? Just, is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so there's one, but it's not necessarily agronomic. It's more, you go online and on YouTube and you type "the man who planted trees."
Yeah.
Okay, wait. I'm just typing it now to see if it's really.
Is this the guy that created water?
Yeah. It's a 30 minutes. I see on YouTube here. The Man Who Planted Trees by Rob and Andy Cruz is the person who uploaded it on YouTube. I don't know if it's them, but it's basically a story. It's a book by Jean Giono. And it's really nice because I think this is a really inspiring story of what we can do with our landscapes. I'm working in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is effectively, in many places, not all, but it is desertifying, and there is a way to reverse that. And agriculture has to be a part of the solution to reverse that because of the amount of land that is used by agriculture, and therefore the impact on the variety of parameters, such as the small water cycle. And so I think I'll add one more thing here as well. I think that we've talked a lot about soil health. We've talked a lot about biodiversity when we're talking about regen ag, and there's been a lot of work done on this. Now the next step is to talk about the small water cycle and the effect of regenerating our ecosystems. So especially here looking at groundwater, tree groundwater interactions. So this is what is going to lead us to really build resilience to climate change. And we don't quite yet, the population or people in general really don't believe the extent to which we can have that effect. But there are many cases, and there is some science that is showing us how the extent to which we can really impact the rainfall and humidity in a region by having a landscape level approach to ecosystem management. And farmers need to be a part of that ecosystem management because they are agroecosystem managers. And so you need to look at you look at that story, because that's going to help give you the emotional understanding. It's really, really beautiful story with beautiful drawing, diseño animado. Okay. Don't know how to say it in English. And then afterwards you look at the work of Alpha Lowe, who has put together, he's got a blog and he's got a project called the Climate Water Project, Alpha Lowe. Okay, and he's doing a lot of work on putting together all these resources and stuff. And this is the next frontier in regen ag.
Would be
amazing.
Lovely to get to talk about this in the podcast for another episode.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Perfect. And our last and punchy question is in honor of the name of our podcast, which is WTF, so What the Field. Is there one thing, since you've started on this journey, this long and exciting journey, that has just really made you think, what the fuck? How is this possible? I don't believe this. It can be good or bad, depending on your mood of the day.
Now I'll talk about my original experience with Mazi Farm. We started on a really like super degraded piece of land on an island, crazy winds, salty winds that was burning the sodium and the chloride from the salt was burning the trees. Nothing was growing. Shallow soils, degraded soils, lots of erosion. Anyways, terrible situation. And then we started working at it, and we started applying agroforestry practices. Not at all intensive in terms of production. We're planting lots of productive trees, and we're starting to get to production. We have a bit of a irrigation issue there, so it's slow. It's a dry land context, but that's fine because we planted lots of windbreaks, lots of wild trees, non-native trees as well. Planted lots of eucalyptus and acacias and it's just like when I was there recently, it was just crazy how the whole place has dramatically changed. Like it's just completely different feeling. The soil is more fluffy. It's actually much darker. There's much less wind. There's a lot more animals. It just feels like a welcoming and enchanting place as compared to before, where it was difficult to stay there the whole day because there was so much wind and you go a bit crazy. You'll see that in actually the story that I from Jean Genot that I talked about. So yeah, when I was there recently, I was like, whoa, what the fuck? This really changed. It's really regenerated. So that was really cool to see. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Nice feeling.
Yeah, that's a nice feeling. And it's so great because you're not the only one who said that. I think that a big part of seeing the initial results of implementing regenerative practices is always quite an emotional and quite a...
Yeah, it is indeed, yeah.
They made a movie about I think it's based on the book by Isabel Tree Wilding, and then they've made a movie about it, and I just watched a trailer before this podcast, and it was exactly what you're describing, like this feeling of being like, oh my god, how is this possible? How quickly it's changed. Completely different feeling to the land and to the landscape, so...
It takes time, but it also just takes a little time. You know, we started 6-7 years ago.
In the grand scheme of things, it's super quick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's still regenerating in the sense now we've got lots of the oak seedlings, the native oak seedlings popping up everywhere. It'll become an oak forest again if we let it be. So that's what we want. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're coming up to the hour, and we always try to keep it below the hour mark, even though it's very difficult when the conversations are this interesting. But thank you so much, Dimitri, for speaking with us. It's been so great.
I appreciate you inviting me on. I really do. So thanks a lot, and keep it up. Really cool what you're doing.
You too.
Likewise.
You too. Keep in touch.
Bye.